We're going to be studying fungi. That's what our unit is about. We've been studying the different kingdoms of life, and so far we've studied bacteria and protists and plants. And so students will already have background about each of those, and we've been kind of working towards talking about how each kingdom meets the requirement or the criteria for all living things.
So what have been the big ideas throughout these different units that you've been teaching?
We've been talking about how different organisms, different types of organisms reproduce, how they are made up of cells, how they obtain energy, what types of waste products they produce as well, and how they grow, and how they adapt and respond to their environment. So these are some of the big ideas that we've been covering throughout each of the kingdoms so far.
So you mentioned that your fungi unit is different this year than it was last year. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, last year the fungi unit was really short. It was probably about a week or so, and the different activities that we did last year were really just kind of discrete entities. For example, we did a mushroom dissection for one of the activities where we just looked at mushroom morphology, and then like on a different day, then we started doing like the yeast experiment where we looked at how much gas was produced by yeast and how different sugar variables could affect that. And so it was really a short unit. We didn't really concentrate on how those things were connected, and we also took some notes too, just on how fungi were, how they affected your life, like with penicillin or different types of diseases that are caused by fungi. But these are just notes. We didn't really do a lot of activities that kind of connected each of these ideas together.
So is that how you see this year as being different?
This year seems like it's going to be a lot more interesting, and I think that it's going to show more of a process. And instead of just like characteristics, these are the characteristics of fungi, it's going to be more about the different processes to satisfy like the requirements for life. And for the fungi unit, it's more about these major life processes like decomposition. What's the role of fungi in an ecosystem or in an environment? How does that relate to how they digest or digestion or how they obtain energy? So they're obtaining it from decomposing materials, and then this digestion is used with cellular respiration to obtain energy, and the energy that they gain from that is to help them reproduce. And so it's more of a process that we're focused on for this unit this year, as opposed to last year where we just talked about these discrete items here and there.
Like last time we were talking, you were saying that part of the emphasis was on like having the kids learn about the different phyla and the different kinds of fungi that they are.
Oh, that's right. The 4 different types of fungi, and we talked about the mushrooms, the molds, and yeast. And so throughout the unit, it was more like I was giving them examples of the different types. So that's why we did the mushroom morphology. Here's an example, like for example, I told the students, here's an example of mushrooms. Take a look at them under the microscope, that sort of thing. And then now let's move on to yeast. Here is an experiment to demonstrate an example of yeast, which is a type of fungus. And so it wasn't as detailed as this year's unit is going to be. Like last year when we did the yeast experiment, it was more like we know that they're going to produce yeast. We can see the balloons getting full of gas or whatnot, but we didn't talk more about what that type of gas was, why it was being produced, and why that was important in the first place. Why was it important for them to produce gas? And so we didn't even talk about that being a waste product. We didn't talk about the fact that by going through this process, they would be obtaining energy.
Well, let me just ask, how do you envision using this model with your students?
Throughout the unit.
Throughout the unit, yeah.
Well, we're going to be talking about the ecological role of fungi, so that will get them towards thinking about decomposition. What are fungi even doing? That sort of thing, and then going from there, having them talk more about what are they using to obtain energy. So what kind of food source? So like when we go into the yeast experiment, we'll be looking at different types of sugar.
Two things. Your essential question.
Okay.
And the structure of your unit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So the essential questions that I have for this unit are, how do fungi affect me? How are they like or unlike me? And why do yeast produce gas? And so I have structured the unit to talk about different parts of that. So for instance, like decomposition, digestion, cellular respiration, and reproduction. So having them, I've structured it so that students are looking at each of those parts together, but then at the end kind of talking about the different relationships between each of those processes. So for instance, we start off by talking about decomposition, the role of fungi in an ecosystem, and digestion, the types of food sources that fungi need in order to complete some of these life processes, and going into cellular respiration, where they obtain energy. And so that will kind of go back to how are fungi like me. Hopefully the students will be able to find some kind of connection there, that fungi, just like us, need energy, and so they obtain that energy through this process here. And then talking about how that energy is allocated in their life towards reproduction.
So in this unit, how are you going to help kids understand this model, and how do you plan to first elicit what they already know?
One of the first activities is to give students a chance to tell me a little bit more about what they know about fungus, because I think in general a lot of students don't really have a clue about what fungus is, and it's not something that seems like it's important to them on an everyday basis. So just by having them look at different cards, pictures of different fungi, and having them talk a little bit more about, well, what do they think fungus or fungi are, and looking at bread molds and talking about what is this that they're looking at, how did it get there, why is it changing over time, what are some of the requirements for allowing it to grow on different surfaces, or what kind of surfaces do they even grow on. So giving them different examples to look at, like the bread mold or the pictures, or even slides under a microscope, to have them maybe, or even pictures of different fungi in different environments, to maybe have them tell me a little bit more about what they know based off of those, and what they already know, to give me some more background information about, do they know things about the fact that fungi are decomposers, or do they know that fungi, require some kind of food source, and that they are trying to gather that food source to gain energy by using cellular respiration. So a lot of these ideas in the model are really complex, and even as a whole, the whole process is really difficult to grasp at first, but by having them talk about their initial ideas, and then by going through each of these, then the students will be able to get a better idea of this model. So based off of what they tell me and their preconceptions, I'll be able to see what kind of misconceptions they might have about fungi, and then I can probably try to build questions that help them think more about some of these processes that maybe they never would have thought of.
Okay, well, I was just thinking that in terms of the previous unit, the plant unit, that pre-quiz that you gave them, helped them think about these different life processes for plants. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, when you start showing them the different cards of the different fungi, and eliciting their ideas about what are these fungi, what do they do, I wonder how much they're going to reference their ideas that they brought up from the plant unit.
I think they're going to, because we've been, for the whole year, I've been trying to set it up where the students are trying to gather evidence for why each kingdom is considered, or like the organisms in each kingdom are considered living things. And so when I gave them the plant pre-quiz, they started like I asked them, how do you think plants gain energy? And so when I looked through the pre-quiz, a lot of students said photosynthesis, but then some students had no idea and had probably never thought about energy. Why would plants even need energy? So I think that after this plant unit and moving on to the fungi unit, that students are going to probably think, they're probably going to make that connection that yes, it's a living thing, so it's going to need energy, but then they might not, because they don't really have a lot of understanding about fungi, they might not know specifically where they're getting that energy from and what that energy is going to be used for.
Mm-hmm. And then what parts do you think they'll grab onto very quickly? What parts will really resonate with them? So the whole idea about energy is a pretty complex idea that would be hard to pick up on right away. But what will they come in with? And what can we build on?
Well, they know the process for photosynthesis, so they know that they need, for plants, they need sunlight, and that sunlight and water, by going through this process of photosynthesis, are going to be converted to sugars and energy. And so students are going to, I think after going through the fungi unit, they might be able to see a connection there between the two. And I think that they'll probably be able to grab onto that idea of they're going through a process to obtain energy at the end. But for what, they won't really understand until we talk more about like reproduction.
So you think they will come in with some ideas about energy use? Or
You mean before the unit begins?
yeah, at the beginning of the unit.
I think so. I think that in the back of their heads, they probably know that yes, it's a living thing, and yes, it requires energy in some way, but they might not realize that that energy can be in the form of sugar or whatnot. I think that will be something that when we do the yeast experiment, it'll be more evident to them that it's a sugar that's helping drive that cellular respiration. Well, I think that because we talked about waste products in photosynthesis, that might help them understand this model, or help, when we get to this area, help them construct a model, because they know that there's some input and there's going to be some kind of an output. And so we know that with photosynthesis, plants have this input, and then in the output they get energy from using the sun's energy. And so I think that will help them, maybe guide them to even talking about, yes, these yeasts are producing gas, but they might even think about energy too, because we know that plants are getting energy from that process as well.